Thank you. It is 24 minutes to 8. Is the government moving towards a deal with the European Union over Northern Ireland's place in the new post-Brexit world, or a confrontation? Legislation to change the Northern Ireland Protocol is going to be introduced in the Commons today. The CBI, the employers' lobby, among those calling for the two sides to sit down and talk. One of the things the British government is proposing, it seems, is a green lane for goods destined for Northern Ireland shops only. Let's talk to Shane Brennan, Chief Executive of the Cold Chain Federation that represents the cold storage industry. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Tell us at the moment what has to happen and the extent to which what has to happen doesn't work.
So goods that currently move from the GB mainland to Northern Ireland have to go through a series of declarations, checks, paperwork checks, and they're also subject to potential inspection at the port. This creates significant uncertainty around the ability of retailers and restaurants to get the goods they need in the time they need them. Of course, at the moment, we're operating under some easements already brought in by the UK government. So the situation isn't as envisaged by the protocol in its purest form. And I guess our biggest concern is that we would see that protocol implemented that would eventually make that supply chain, those integrated supply chains, not work.
So the green lane would be perfect for you?
Yeah, we support the idea of the green lane. It's the concept that absolutely is the right one. Packaged, finished goods that are coming from the GB mainland into Northern Ireland and they're not going to be consumed by Northern Ireland consumers shouldn't be subject to the sorts of paperwork required for goods that are going to China for a free trade to a third country.
And what did you accept that there would then be some smuggling risk, that some of those goods might find their way into the EU single market?
Yeah, absolutely. There is that risk, and that's why the system has to come with significant monitoring, has to come with very tough enforcement, and crucially, it requires trust. It requires trust between the traders and the authorities, and it requires trust between the two authorities to work together to identify smuggling where it might happen and clamp down on it. But that's the way that you tackle smuggling anyway. Paperwork doesn't stop smugglers. Tough enforcement does.
Because we heard earlier from a food manufacturer, Northern Ireland-based food manufacturer in the programme, who was making the point that actually for his business things are ideal as they are, because they can export freely into the Republic, and they can also run their business in Northern Ireland. In other words, there is quite a lot to be thrown away here if these negotiations with the EU are too violently conducted, as it were. Do you accept that?
Yeah, this has to completely echo what the CBI said in your programme earlier. This has to be done through agreement, and it has to be done through compromise. Now, the idea of unilaterally imposing a dual regulatory system just on the UK's terms clearly won't work. Now, what we want is our lorries to be able to move freely, and we want that to be done through the goodwill of both sets of authorities. So that's what we want to see happen. But we think the green lane can be achieved, and versions of this have been proposed by the EU at different points. So we think that there is a deal to be done. It just has to be conducted in the right way.
OK, well, Shane Brennan, thank you very much. Let's turn to Katja Adler then, our Europe correspondent, who was listening to that. Morning to you, Katja. What's the state of thinking at the moment in the EU and specifically, I suppose, within the Commission?
Well, I mean, obviously the Commission represents all the 27 EU member states in these dealings with the Northern Ireland Protocol. I think the EU is going to be watching the Commission particularly very carefully today, the proposed legislation from the government, the detail of that legislation. What you shouldn't expect from the EU today, whatever is announced, is for the EU to jump up and down and to throw everything at the government and say, right, we're going to suspend the post-Brexit trade agreement immediately. I think what the EU is looking to do in its response, in its opinion, is to make a very clear dividing line between the actions of the government, which the EU says could break international law, depending on the content of this legislation, would be a breaking of good faith and definitely a breaking of an international agreement agreed and signed by the Prime Minister. So when, after the announcement has been made, you can expect the EU's chief negotiator to make a statement or a very small press conference, and the Commission will then pore over the detail of the proposed legislation and a few days later will say most likely that it will restart legal proceedings against the government if it believes that it is breaking the agreed protocol on Northern Ireland. Member states that I've spoken to have also said, look, we're not saying we wouldn't introduce targeted tariffs against the UK and eventually, possibly, yes, suspend the whole post-Brexit trade agreement. But we are so far away from that. Justin, even if you look at those legal proceedings that will probably be restarted by the EU now, they take a very long time. But the EU says, well, it'll take a long time to get this proposed legislation through Parliament as well. So the hope here is in Brussels that the two sides, despite all of this and all of the sound and the fury, can sit down at the negotiating table, and the EU insists that it has a lot more flexibilities to offer, exactly the kind of flexibilities that Shane was talking about.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it?
Particularly around customs.
Yeah, because, I mean, they tend to see things in a rather legalistic way, don't they? I remember Bertie Ahern on this programme, gosh, it was probably years ago now, the former Irish Prime Minister, saying that in the end the deal had to be that a blind eye was turned to a little bit of smuggling here and there. Pretty much what Shane Brennan wasn't saying turn a blind eye to it, but he said he accepts that there is going to be some smuggling. Do you think eventually, has the EU kind of got the bandwidth, do you think, to just accept that that has to be the end place?
Well, look, first of all, I think you cannot ignore what the UK government is proposing in EU eyes at the moment. This was a deal that was negotiated by the Prime Minister, it was hailed by the Prime Minister, it was signed by the Prime Minister, and what we're expecting in this legislation, we do not know the exact detail of it, and it will be important to see that detail of the proposed legislation, would be to at least rip up parts of that co-negotiated agreement. So the EU is not feeling very flexible about that. Where it says it has a lot of flexibilities is it put forward a whole load of proposals in October, which the government said didn't go far enough. The EU says that's fine. It wasn't a take it or leave it agreement. It does have flexibilities. What you were talking about there, the idea of a green lane and a red lane, you know, for goods that would stay in Northern Ireland or that need more checks that would go into the rest of the EU. The EU's spoken about an express lane. Well, that sounds very similar to the green lane. So you can actually see where there could be convergence. But you quoted a former Irish Prime Minister. Well, the current Taoiseach says that this action today, the idea of unilaterally overriding the protocol, would be deeply damaging and mark a historic low point in relations post-Brexit between the EU and the UK. So I think it's possible to find agreement, but this is going to be a very rocky road right now.
Katja, thank you. We'll be talking to George Eustace, the Environment Secretary, at 10 past.